Hi everyone, today is an unusual video. I will be answering your questions that you've been asking via my comment section since I started this YouTube channel. So this video is going to be packed with tips, hints and ways to make films stand out on your phone. So let's get into it right now. So the first question is about my short film Survive at All Costs. And that question is it shot on 24 FPS, so 24 frames per second? Yes, it is. And the reason why is because it gives you motion blur. So as we can see from this shot here, as I move my shoe out, it gets that blur effect, and that's real to real life. Your eyes would see a bit of a blur if something's moving quite quickly. Again, we're getting the keys out here, you have that motion blur. It just makes things look a lot more professional. It's what you would see in any kind of film. So it gives you that real kind of professional quality to your film, so it's absolutely necessary. Match that with a 1/48 shutter speed as well. Question number 2 is, did you use any specific LUT or was it all done by you? Now, I actually have done this myself, so it's not a LUT as such. Basically, I put a yellow sort of tinge to the images in this film, so it feels a bit more post-apocalyptic. So if I take this shot from Caterpillar, which is another short film that I made, you can see if I go into DaVinci Resolve here, and I go to the color tab, which is at the bottom, click on that, and now we can start making changes to this shot. So all I did was go to the wheels on the bottom left of the color panel here, and after making a quick white balance check on this, I go to it and I start bringing everything down into the yellows a little bit, just a tiny bit more. You really don't want anything more than a little touch because it will start to get a bit crazy looking. You don't want anything extreme, so always a little bit at a time. So as you can see here, I'm bringing in the yellows a bit more, and every time I do that, it's just bringing a slightly different feel to it, like it's a post-apocalyptic. So that's without the yellow sort of tinge that I put on it, the yellow coloring, and this is with. The next question refers to a tutorial I made on how to do an automatic focus pull with Filmic Pro. If I zoom from point 1 to 2 and then the focus on point 2 is blurred and doesn't adjust until I manually then go and press point 2 on the focus tab, I wonder if there's a way to combine both of these features together. Now, essentially the answer to that is no, you can't put them both together. You can't zoom in and do the automatic focus pull at the same time. Also, I wouldn't recommend using a zoom at all on a phone because it will give you a really blurred image. As you can see here when I go into the leaf, it is just way too blurred and too noisy. If we zoom a little bit more, you can see where the noise is coming in here. When there's not enough light especially, it creates an image that you're not going to want on your film at all. So no, you can't combine them, and I wouldn't do a zoom anyway. How do you start the automatic focus pull? Do you just press the video record button and does it start automatically? So essentially with the automatic focus pull, you set your points and then you go back and forth between that by pressing the white lines. You do not press the record button to start the automatic focus pull, and when you hit the record button, that focus pull as a result won't move. So you hit record and then you actually do the focus pull then. The next question is about my short film Broken Zen. Now this is the third film I made, so I was starting to learn a little bit more about angles and shots by this point, and the question is, looks like you used an anamorphic lens, which one? So for this, to get the amazing shots that I got that look really stunning, I used the Moondog Labs anamorphic lens. This is the 1.33 times anamorphic lens by Moondog Labs, and I cannot recommend this anamorphic lens enough. It gives you that nice silky lens flare that you're looking for with the anamorphic look. It's not as thick as other brands that make, so this is quite a nice subtle look for an anamorphic lens, and it gives you that nice wider aspect ratio as well, of course, and it just makes everything look a bit more high budget. And I'll put links to all the accessories I'm discussing in this video in the link below if you want to check them out as well. And you can tell this is a top quality lens because it's been used on a lot of feature films including Tangerine, Blue Moon and High Flying Bird. The next question is, what phone do I use? The person says I have an iPhone SE2, but I find it too noisy. The phone that I started off with for the first year was an iPhone 6S. That's the phone that I used for Broken Zen and got a lot of really good shots out of this, I have to say, because it shoots in 4K as well. As long as your lighting's pretty good, you can still get decent images out of a 6S. And don't forget, Tangerine was made with an iPhone 5, I believe, so don't use your phone as an excuse, make what you can with what you have. The next phone I had was an iPhone 8, and that's what I shot Caterpillar with, my short film. Again, really nice images I got out of this. It's not perfect. I think some shots I would like to have got a bit less noise in, but you have to do what you can with phones sometimes, particularly with the older models. The newer ones are much different, but you can do whatever you can with an older phone and you can still get some really nice images. I now use an iPhone 12, so I'm really happy with this. You get a 10-bit color, of course, as well with this, as well as the 4K. You get a 4K selfie camera, which is really handy for videos like this. And of course, that's what I'm using for my next short film as well, which I'm starting to write. For wanting everything in focus in landscape scenes, where would you put the focus reticule? Would it be the furthest focal point from your lens? So essentially, yes, you got it bang on. You'd put that focus point on the furthest away subject, so it'd be these buildings, for example, and then lock it. That way you'll get more or less everything in focus. You'll never get everything in focus because that's impossible really. But if you want to have most things in focus, or at least the background, then put it onto the furthest building or whatever the bit of landscape is in the distance. Lock your focus and then you'll have as much as you can in focus with a phone. How do you attach ND filters to a smartphone? Now there's a few ways you can do this. The way that I do it most recently is with my B-Script Pro rig. Again, description has a link to this below if you want to check that out. Now what I do is this has a 37mm lens mount or filter mount. So I get a step-up ring, so I got 52mm ND filters. This step-up ring is 37mm to 52mm. I screw that on top of there, then I get my ND filter and screw on top of the step-up ring. Also, another way that I do this is by using a clip. So if you don't have a rig like the B-Script Pro rig, you can get very cheap on Amazon little clips that you can then attach an ND filter to. A lot of the time you do have to get it as a pack with ND filters. That's what I did. I got a Neewer ND filter that comes with a clip. I don't really use the ND filter that much. I use my Moondog Labs ones, but I use that if I'm not using a rig to then clip on to the phone with my ND filters. Next question refers to my cinematographer kit video, and that is there any reason to use flat over log V2? A really interesting question, so I'm glad you've asked that because I think a lot of people want to know this. If you're using an older phone, you have flat and log V2. This is going to work for your new phones as well with the flat version they've got on there and log V3. With flat, you actually have less dynamic range than log V3 or V2. That's just the nature of why you'd have a log V2, V3. And here you can see when it's color graded, it looks pretty nice, but it's a noise. And you go to log V3, you're getting more dynamic range, so it's much lighter, less saturated in the initial shot. And then it looks a little bit nicer in terms of coloration on that shot. But when you see them side by side, I find when you're particularly shooting low light scenes, if like this, when you've got shadows and stuff, I tend to use flat myself. I just find it gets less noise than using log. Now with a new phone, like the iPhone 12 that I'm filming with now, you get 10-bit, although with the new phone now, it's just better to use log V3. It's a much cleaner version than the V2. So I think in general, if you know what you're doing, you've got half decent lighting, log V3 is better than flat. But in the older phones, log V2 is actually worse than flat in most cases, unless you have perfect lighting. The cinematographer kit, can it be used in post-production or is it to be set before you start shooting? Well, essentially you need to set it before you start shooting. This is something that you do sort of use in post-production, but you don't set any of this in post-production, if that makes sense. So you go to your settings, you use flat or you use log V2, V3, whatever phone you have gives you different options. And then in post-production, you then start making changes to your color grading, correction, that kind of thing, bringing up your shadows, your highlights, whatever you want to do with it. So it's something you do before you hit record, and then you go into post-production, you use that for color grading. If I shoot in flat or log, I color correct in post and then the color grading, right? Or just the color grade. So yes, essentially you do the color corrections first and then color grade. I check my white balance. Normally it's right, but sometimes I forget when I'm shooting a film on one of the takes about the white balance because I'm trying to do everything myself. Check my shadows, my highlights, make sure that's all where I want it, and then I color grade. So do your color corrections first, or your shadows, that kind of stuff, the basic stuff, and then do the color grade. This next question is really interesting as well if you're thinking about getting the cinematographer kit. Is this add-on good for people like me that don't use color grading software or other after process software? I only cut my projects. No, you don't need it if you're only cutting your projects. It's only for color grading. So if you're sort of 50-50 about getting it, I would only get it if you are color grading. Otherwise, it's not worth buying because you're not going to use it. Is super stable mode on most new smartphones not an option for steady filming? So this is referring to my video where I was talking about the Ulanzi Pro, which I have right here. And basically she's asking, do you really need one of these if the phone's already got inbuilt stabilization? My answer to that would be yes, because even though the stabilization is really good on the newest phones, it's always worth getting your hands off of the phone and onto a rig like this. That way, when you're moving, going for like pans and tilts, that kind of thing, it just gives you that little bit more steadiness to your shots. And if you have to do post-production work on stabilization as well, it's going to be less so if you're using a handheld rig like this, or if you're using a B-Script Pro rig like this as well. I do think they're a worthwhile investment. If you don't want to spend loads on a B-Script Pro rig, do get a Ulanzi Pro, something like that, or a small rig which will give you a bit more stabilization as well, so you don't have to worry about little handheld jitters as you're moving your camera along. The next question is, what settings do I mostly use? Now, the settings that I use for my films would be 24 frames per second matched with a 1/48 shutter speed. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's to get that motion blur, which makes your film just look a lot more real and more natural to what your eyes would really see. I set my white balance, of course. I do my exposure, check the focus, all those kind of things. So those are the main settings that I'll look for when I'm making my film, and just make sure those are all correct before I hit record. You use 24 frames per second for an example, but in Europe and other parts of the world, it can cause flickering when I video anything with artificial lights, because we are in 50 Hertz cycles per second, and with the lighting and power here. I believe that I should use 25 frames per second to remedy that. Is that correct? Yes, you are absolutely correct. I film everything at 24 frames per second because in general, I've not really had too much of an issue in the UK and London with that. But there have been some scenes where I've shot where the light's been flickering and I've had to adjust how I'm filming the shot so I don't get that. So in the future, I really do need to be filming in 25 frames per second, you yourself as well. And if you're in Europe, especially with narrative films, because you really want it to look spectacular and professional, I would film at 25 frames per second with a 1/50 shutter speed, so you still get that motion blur, and it's going to look basically the same as 24 frames per second anyway. Hi, I have a problem. I want to shoot at 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second. Filmic Pro doesn't allow me to up the shutter speed to 1/240 or 1/480. I think this stops at 1/125. The next question, which links into this, is, do you know any ways to control the shutter speed while shooting at 124 frames per second? In my Filmic Pro app, it does not allow control, ISO, and shutter speed individually like it does in normal standard frame rates. Looking at 60 frames per second here and capturing at 60 frames per second, if you get your settings right, your focus, your exposure, blah, 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 and you see on the left-hand side that we've got the ISO and shutter speed, it is moving up and down. Now on some phones it can change, so if that's the case for you, where you simply, no matter what you do, you cannot get it to move the ISO or shutter speed individually, or lock them and change them, look on the Filmic Pro website or email them, because I know some phones, particularly I believe Android phones, can have difficulties with certain aspects of filmmaking with Filmic Pro. So email them if this is still an issue, but you can change the ISO and the shutter speed individually and lock them and change them to whatever you want. It will give you different looks, more of a staccato look for slow motion, but you can change them. Do you ever do any editing on your phone? I actually generally don't do editing on my phone. I find a screen, even though I've got the iPhone 12 now, where it has quite a nice large screen, it's not big enough for me in terms of color grading, correction. I want to see this image as big as possible and see all my controls as big as possible. So I use my laptop, I use DaVinci Resolve, the free version. You get a huge range of controls with that, even though it's free. And I would really recommend it if your laptop or your PC, whatever it is good enough to withhold all the information that it uses and can use it smoothly, then I would do that. I have used LumaFusion recently, and I actually teach classes now with Filmic Pro, so I show kids how to make films, and then I show them how to edit it with LumaFusion. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with LumaFusion and how quick and smooth it is for editing 4K footage. I have edited one of my videos on LumaFusion very, very early on before I knew much about it, so I think now I'm learning more and more about it, I'll probably use it more for my videos. It is an excellent editing app, LumaFusion, and I cannot recommend it enough, and I'll probably be using that more in the future. But for now, especially with films, because I can color grade, I use DaVinci Resolve. May I know which ratio we have to shoot for YouTube short films? Is it 16:9 or is it 2:39:1? Essentially, you can film in whatever aspect ratio you want. It will look slightly different. Sometimes it might be a bit weird if you use like a 1:1 ratio on YouTube. It will look like Instagram kind of feel. But you can use 16:9 or 2:39:1, which is more of an anamorphic look. It will just show up slightly different on YouTube, but you can absolutely use both of those. So 16:9 is the aspect ratio you'd expect to see on a regular TV or your phone or your laptop, anywhere really. And the 2:3:1 aspect ratio is the anamorphic look, which shows up absolutely fine on YouTube. That's what my Broken Zen short film is on YouTube as well. Do you need or do you shoot in log? Saw some videos that the log is fake anyway. What's your recommendation go to? Do you just shoot in natural? Mostly I do shoot in natural, so if I'm doing a tips video like this, a tutorial, a vlog, then I would absolutely just shoot in natural because I'm not bothered about color grading, that kind of stuff. As long as it's looking good, the white balance is fine, that's good for me. If I'm shooting a film with my 6S on my iPhone 8 back in the day, I was using flat. Now with my iPhone 12, because it's a much better camera, much better sensor, all that kind of stuff, I think I will start using log V3. I've seen videos in low light and in bright light outdoors that would suggest that it's much, much better now. So if you're not bothered about color correction, I really wouldn't worry about the cinematographer kit and these kind of things. But if you do want to make professional films and change the coloring a bit, then if you've got an older phone, I would use flat. If you've got a newer phone, play around with flat and log V3, see what works best for you. But I would probably go with log V3. That's what I'm going to try for my next short film in early next year as well anyway. Again guys, if you've got any questions that haven't been asked or answered in this video, then do ask them in the comments section below. I'll answer them, and I'll also be making another collage of answers to your questions later on next year as well, once I get enough. So if you want to find out more about Filmic Pro, which is the app that I use all the time for my videos, then check out the playlist right here. If you want to learn more about smartphone filmmaking in sunnier conditions when that happens for you in your country, check out the video right here. So take care, see you on the next one, bye bye.